My name is Margaret Leland. I'm 68 years old. I used to teach middle school English in New Orleans before I retired. These days, I tend to my herb garden, bake for the church on Sundays, and, until recently, spoke only when spoken to. I've always believed in staying quiet when there's nothing kind to say. But what I didn't say turned out to be the smartest thing I ever did. Because a week after my son got married, my daughter-in-law showed up at my kitchen table with a pen and a contract, expecting me to give away my soul. She sat across from me in that soft beige blouse she wore at brunch after the wedding, still smelling faintly of peonies and ambition. Her name is Serena. She's lovely, articulate, thoughtful in all the ways that make people lower their guard. But I've seen her kind before. I've taught girls like her. They smile with their eyes and calculate with their silence. And that afternoon, I watched her carefully unfold a cream-colored envelope with embossed corners and pull out a neatly printed contract with my name typed in bold. She placed it on the table with the same grace you'd use to set down a glass of wine. Then she pulled out her pen. It was sleek, black, shiny. The kind of pen lawyers use when they know you won't read past the third clause. She clicked it once and placed it gently beside the paper, right in front of me. She smiled, casual, almost tender. "It's nothing major, Margaret. Just a quick document to align our family assets. Simplifies everything long term." I didn't move. Not a twitch. Not a breath deeper than necessary. I stared at the pen, not because I was surprised, but because that exact moment was what I had prepared for. She continued, as if reading from a script. "Daniel and I are planning ahead, you know. We want to invest wisely, maybe start a trust for the future. He mentioned you handled a lot of finances when your husband passed. You're smart with money, you'll get it." She was right about one thing. I do get it. What Serena didn't know was this. My late husband, James, left behind a real estate portfolio worth over $35 million. I never told our son. I never mentioned a word to anyone. Not even the bank manager I play chess with on Wednesdays knows the full extent. I kept it quiet, not because I wanted to hide, but because I knew how fast good intentions turn greedy. And now, sitting across from Serena with her soft voice and hard eyes, I was glad I had. Daniel had only been married for 7 days. 7 days. And here was his wife sliding a document across the table like she was offering me a scone. Only it wasn't a gift. It was bait. I didn't touch the contract. Instead, I poured her some tea. Earl Grey, the good kind. She didn't reach for it. Her eyes flicked down to the paper, then back to me. I figured it's best to get all this done before it gets complicated. You know how paperwork can be. So messy if we wait. I smiled. Just enough to be polite, not enough to agree. I glanced at the contract without reading it. I already knew what it was. I've seen this game before. It always starts politely, neatly, with a smile and a pen. Then the ink bleeds, and so does your dignity. "I'll take a look later," I said softly, pushing the papers back toward her with 2 fingers. "After lunch." She blinked. Once. Just enough to know she hadn't expected that. Because the truth was, I wasn't going to look at it. I wasn't going to sign anything. I wasn't going to let someone who had only known me for 11 months and married my son for 7 days rewrite the terms of my life. And yet I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't slam the table or quote legal codes. I just served tea and let the silence do what words never could. Because silence, when used right, makes people show their cards. And Serena had just played hers. I waited until she left. Contract untouched, tea unsipped, her steps too careful on my front porch. Then I took a long breath and locked the door behind her. That evening, I pulled out the manila folder I had hidden in the back of my linen closet. Inside, it was the real truth. Deeds, transfers, the entire real estate portfolio, all held in a name Serena had never heard of, a name I made sure she'd never connect to mine. I had stayed silent for 2 years since James passed. I hadn't told my son about the $35 million in assets, and that day, in my kitchen, watching my new daughter-in-law click her pen beside a contract I was never meant to sign, I was glad I kept quiet. I was more than glad. I was ready. If you're still watching, let me ask you this. Have you ever kept something to yourself? Not out of fear, but out of wisdom? Drop your story in the comments. And if you've ever had to smile through a conversation you saw right through, tap like and subscribe, because some of us aren't loud. We're just listening and waiting. After Serena left that day, with her contract and her careful shoes, I stood alone in my kitchen and reached into the drawer where I kept my tea towels. Beneath them, wrapped in soft linen, was a small brass key. Not just any key, a gold-plated office key, engraved with the initials J.L. James Leland, my husband. It no longer opened anything. The office had long been sold, but I carried that key with me like a compass. Because it didn't unlock a door, it unlocked a memory. James was brilliant. That's the only word that fits. A man who could sketch a building upside down while explaining load distribution in a voice calm enough to soothe a crying baby. I met him when I was 23. He walked into my school one day as a guest speaker for our architecture unit. I was a substitute teacher then, still trying to figure out if I belonged in the classroom. He said one sentence that day I never forgot. Design is about making space for life to unfold with grace. I fell in love with that man before the final bell rang. We were married 6 months later. We didn't have much in the beginning, just an old Chevy, 2 mattresses pushed together, and the shared belief that we could build something lasting. James did more than build. He expanded, little by little. A duplex in Baton Rouge, a rundown Victorian in Lafayette, an empty lot in Shreveport that no one wanted until he saw something others missed. He had vision, and with every property we added, he taught me everything. How to read contracts, how to spot predatory clauses, how to structure investments under trusts and shells. He never believed in hiding money, but he believed in protecting it from people who only saw dollar signs instead of legacy. He used to say, "One day, this will be for Daniel. And if something happens to me, you'll know exactly how to keep it safe." And then, something happened. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't even dramatic, just quiet. A pain in his back that turned into scans, into appointments, into 6 months of radiation and whispered prayers when Daniel wasn't listening. James passed away 2 weeks after our 41st anniversary. And just like that, the world got quieter. Too quiet. Daniel was 31 at the time, still finding his way. I remember sitting him down after the funeral, my hands folded, the will in my lap. But something in his eyes, something broken and searching, made me stop. He didn't need money. He needed his father. So I kept the details vague. "Dad left us enough. You'll be okay. Let me take care of it for now." And Daniel, bless his gentle heart, didn't ask. He trusted me. I didn't tell him about the $35 million in assets James left behind. I didn't mention the blind trusts, or the tax shelters, or the 7-digit account sitting quietly in a holding bank under my maiden name. I didn't lie. I simply stayed quiet, because I'd already seen what money could do. A week after James's funeral, his brother Harold showed up with a pie and a probate lawyer. He smiled, patted my hand, and said, "You probably need help sorting all this. James always said he'd leave things to the family." He meant himself. He had no legal claim, but he came ready, with loopholes, with veiled threats, with helpful suggestions on how to sell off the assets before the market dips. He knew what James had built. He wanted it. And if I had blinked, I would have lost it all. But I didn't blink. I called Ellis that night. We buried James in the morning. We buried Harold's ambitions that afternoon, under a mountain of notarized trusts and sealed documents he couldn't touch. That's when I decided, no one gets close to this unless they come with clean hands and a full heart. So I stayed quiet, not out of fear, but out of love. Because Daniel is his father's son, kind, trusting, vulnerable in ways the world doesn't reward. If I had handed him $35 million without teaching him how the world works, I would have been handing Serena a crown she didn't earn. I look at that key now, cool in my hand, and remember James's voice again. Legacy is love with a long-term plan. And so I made one. I wouldn't fight Serena with rage. I wouldn't confront her with fire. I would do what James taught me to do. I would watch. I would wait. And when the moment came, I would build the ending myself. The first time Serena came to my house, she brought tulips, pale yellow, tied with twine, wrapped in recycled paper, the kind of gift that says, "I'm thoughtful, but effortless." She smiled when I opened the door, not too wide, just enough to register grace. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and warm, like a song sung under one's breath. "Hi, Margaret. I hope I'm not too early." She wasn't. In fact, she was exactly 10 minutes early, which told me everything I needed to know. People like Serena arrive early not to be polite, but to observe the room before the room observes them. I welcomed her in, of course. I'd been raised better than to greet someone's fiancé with suspicion. I offered her tea, Earl Grey, and she accepted. Her movements were fluid, careful, like someone always aware of where her elbows are. We sat in the sunroom. The light filtered through the lace curtains in soft waves. Serena complimented the embroidery. I told her I'd done it years ago. She nodded, impressed, maybe genuinely, maybe strategically. With women like Serena, it's hard to tell where the admiration ends and the inventory begins. She glanced around as she sipped, her eyes pausing just a little too long on the bookshelf, then the mantel, then the hallway leading to James's old study. Then she asked me something that snapped the air between us like a wire pulled tight. "Didn't you and James own a house on Birchwood back in the 90s? I came across something about it while researching a title deed for work. Gorgeous structure. Early craftsman, right?" I smiled, but only with my lips. Birchwood, the 1998 property. The one James bought in my name, then transferred into a trust under a shell company 2 years later. A house we'd never lived in, a property we never advertised, a name that should never have appeared on any casual Google search, and yet she knew, or at least suspected. I stirred my tea slowly, my voice even. "Oh, Birchwood. That one's long gone. Sold it to a nurse who took care of James during his recovery years." That wasn't a lie. We did sell it, to her, but only after the paperwork was layered thick enough to make any bloodhound dizzy. Serena didn't push. She just nodded, smiled, and moved on to compliment the azaleas blooming outside. But something inside me had shifted. It's a strange thing to feel danger wrapped in a compliment, to recognize that someone isn't being rude or aggressive, but precise, intentional, strategic. That day, I watched her the way you watch the tide rise when you're not sure how far it will come. Daniel was smitten. I saw it from the beginning. He lit up when she entered a room. He softened around her. I'd never seen my son look so sure of someone, and that frightened me more than I wanted to admit, because I had prayed for that, for years. I used to sit in the kitchen after James passed, watching Daniel fumble through half-hearted dates and late-night loneliness and whisper to the walls, "Please let him find someone who sees him, who stays." And then Serena appeared, and now here she was, in my house, sipping my tea, remembering addresses I never expected to be remembered, and smiling in a way that made me feel like the whole room was made of glass. That night, after she left, I sat on my porch with the key to James's office in my hand and whispered a different prayer. Let me be wrong about her. Let this be old paranoia. Let her love my son as he deserves. but my gut had already spoken. I had seen that kind of smile before, not in Serena's age group, but older, at boardroom tables, at estate meetings, after funerals. Smiles that hide ambition, smiles that ask questions with compliments, smiles that hold out tulips, with roots still dripping in soil that's not theirs. I didn't want a war. I wanted a wedding. I wanted peace. But sometimes, peace has to be protected. And from that moment on, I watched Serena a little closer. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I loved my son more than she ever could. And something told me she didn't come into his life just to love him. She came to own it. They arrived 2 days after the wedding, newlyweds glowing. Serena wore soft cream slacks and a lilac blouse, hair perfectly gathered in a low twist. Daniel had on the navy sport coat I gave him last Christmas. They brought a cake, vanilla chiffon with lemon curd. Serena said it was from the bakery that did their wedding. I nodded politely, though I couldn't taste anything but tension in the air. We sat in the living room. I had arranged the floral cushions the way James used to like them, one upright, one slightly angled, to remind myself this was still my house. Serena complimented the arrangement again. She always did. Daniel looked a bit nervous, fidgeted with the sleeve of his jacket. Then Serena took the lead. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a folder, placed it gently on the table between us, slid it forward. A pen lay diagonally across the top, polished, weighted. The kind that signs checks, deeds, fates. "We wanted to get a head start on this," she said softly. "Daniel and I are building our financial future together as a team, and we'd love for you to be part of it." She opened the folder like it was a wedding album, not a legal document. Inside, a multi-page agreement titled Leland Family Asset Consolidation Agreement. A contract, naming me as a participant, requesting that I list any significant holdings, homes, property, investments, to be disclosed, evaluated, and potentially integrated into a shared growth trust. I stared at the title for exactly 5 seconds. Then, without a word, I reached for the tea tray beside me, lifted the delicate bone china cup I'd used every morning since James died, the one with the small crack near the handle, poured myself a slow stream of Earl Grey. Steam curled around my fingers. I didn't speak, not yet. Instead, I stirred. 1, 2, 3. Serena's smile faltered just a fraction. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, it's just a way to protect the family's future. Serena's father's a financial planner. He helped us put this together." I met my son's eyes. Calm, steady. Then looked down, took a sip, let the silence do what no raised voice ever could. Serena leaned forward. "Of course it's voluntary, but transparency is a virtue in a family. We don't want surprises down the line, especially if anything were to happen." I set the cup down with precision, looked at the pen, then at her. "Thank you for the cake," I said. "That's all." Daniel opened his mouth, perhaps to explain, perhaps to apologize. But Serena touched his arm and he stopped. They stayed 15 more minutes. Small talk, mostly her, about curtains and upcoming renovations, about real estate. She didn't bring up the contract again, but she didn't take it with her either. She left it neatly on the table when they said goodbye. The door closed. I watched their car pull out of the drive. Then I sat back down, alone in the silence they left behind, and I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened the side drawer beneath James's old record player and took out a card. Cream linen, gold-embossed lettering. Ellis Cartwright, attorney at law, my husband's best friend since college, the man who handled James's estate, discreet, loyal, razor-sharp. Retired now, but never fully. I dialed the number printed in faint ink. He picked up after 3 rings. "Ellis? It's Margaret." A pause, then warmth. "Well, now, I haven't heard that voice in too long." "I need your help," I said simply, and I told him everything. The house visit, the contract, Serena's Birchwood question, her eyes. Ellis didn't ask why I never told Daniel about the inheritance. He already knew. He was the one who made sure it was held in a private trust, untraceable, except by the executor named in James's handwritten will. "You were right to stay quiet," he said, "but now you'll have to do more than stay quiet." I glanced at the contract on the coffee table, Serena's pen glinting beneath the lamp. "I'm not interested in revenge," I told him, "just protection, for James's legacy, for my peace." Ellis chuckled lightly. "Then we'd better draw a few lines, Margaret, before she redraws the whole map." That night, I didn't sleep much, but for the first time in a while, I didn't feel powerless either. They came to me with a pen and a plan, but they forgot something. I still hold the original blueprint, and I know every hidden door in the house James built. Ellis didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, he sent me the preliminary draft of what we'd come to call the mirror file. On paper, it looked like a legitimate asset declaration, realistic, modest, clean. According to this file, I was worth approximately $480,000, mostly in conservative healthcare stocks, a modest pension, and a house appraised well below market value due to recent foundation repairs and zoning issues. Ellis crafted every line with the precision of a master sculptor. He added a few frozen assets for realism, a court dispute over a rental property, a defunct investment in a green tech startup. Nothing extravagant, nothing worth chasing too hard. But buried within that report was something far more important than any number, a traceable breadcrumb. He embedded a digital watermark imperceptible to the naked eye on the PDF itself. Anyone who copied, printed, forwarded, or opened the document on an unauthorized device would trigger a unique digital ping that sent a time-stamped location log to Ellis's secure server. "I can't stop them from being curious," he said over the phone, "but I can make sure they don't sneak through the back door without us knowing." I saved the file in a separate drive. Then, after staring at it for a long moment, I dragged it to a USB stick, labeled it in neat, careful handwriting, "Financials, 2019 to 2024, Margaret Leland," and placed it in the upper drawer of the desk in my den, unlocked, slightly visible beneath a stack of water bills. It was bait, and I hated every part of it. But I knew it was necessary, because sometimes the only way to know someone's intention is to give them a chance to reveal it. That night, I stood in the hallway looking into the room James once used as his study. His old leather chair was still there, untouched. The bookshelf still leaned slightly to the right, and on its second shelf, tucked beside his favorite architecture journals, was the small golden key I now wore on a chain beneath my collar. His office key, the real vault, the one nobody would think to look for. I clutched the key as I stood there and whispered into the empty room, "You'd know what to do if you were here." James used to say, "If you want to test a bridge, don't tiptoe. Drive a truck across it." This file, this decoy, was my truck. But my heart wasn't as steel-forged as the plan. I was a mother first, and a part of me, no matter how much reason I layered over it, still hoped this entire elaborate ruse would prove unnecessary, that Serena would never go near the file, that Daniel would never ask questions about trusts or deeds, that love could remain somehow untouched by suspicion. But hope, I've learned, is a dangerous lullaby. So I let it play, soft and far away, while I returned to the sharpness of the present. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and let my thoughts swirl. Being a mother doesn't end when your child gets married. It doesn't dissolve when someone calls you mother-in-law or gifts you a bouquet with the wrong flowers. No, being a mother sharpens then. It deepens. You begin to watch, not just with your eyes, but with every bone in your body. You listen between silences. You measure smiles. You catalog words like transparency and future planning and consolidation, because you know, at your age, those words never come alone. They come dressed in strategy. I wanted Daniel to be happy. Every mother does. But I had come to understand something most never speak aloud. Happiness doesn't come from a wife who smiles wide or plans elaborate weddings. It comes from a partner who doesn't need to lie, who doesn't pretend, who doesn't smile while checking the titles of houses that were never discussed at family dinners. I had hoped Serena would be that kind of woman. I had wanted so badly to be wrong about her. But now I needed proof. This decoy wasn't just a trap for Serena. It was a test for myself, to see if I could sit still, watch, wait, endure, and if it came to it, act quietly, decisively, without screaming or slamming doors, because I wasn't just protecting money. I was protecting the truth of who James was, of what he built, of what he gave everything for, and no one, no matter how polite or polished, was going to take that away from us. Not while I still had a key and a voice. 3 days later, Serena came back, alone this time. She texted first, "Could we have tea, just the two of us? I'd love a moment to connect woman to woman." The wording made me smile, carefully chosen, just warm enough to lower defenses, just vague enough to hold power. I replied simply, "Come by at 4. She arrived exactly on time, with a lavender-scented candle and a silk-wrapped box of macarons from a bakery I knew was overpriced. Her hair was down, softer, and she wore flats instead of her usual heels, as if dressing herself down would dress up her sincerity. "Oh, it smells like rosemary in here," she said as she stepped into the kitchen. "It's so comforting." I nodded. James used to love it when I cooked lamb with rosemary. I kept the habit. I poured the tea. Earl Grey again. She smiled as I passed her the cup. Then slowly she set it aside and reached into her bag. No folder this time. Just a single piece of paper, folded into thirds. "I know last time was a little formal," she began. "I wanted this to feel more personal. Just something to make things smoother down the line. You know, avoid probate complications, future stress for Daniel. Simple clarity." She looked at me like she'd just offered to help fold laundry, not suggest a preemptive legal declaration of assets. "Trust me, I'm not trying to meddle," she added, her voice sweetened with deliberate hesitance. "But it's easier for everyone if we're all transparent now, rather than sort through confusion later." I let her words settle, then reached into the drawer by my side. With the same calm I used to fold Daniel's baby clothes, I pulled out the USB stick Ellis and I had prepared, resting gently atop a printed version of the decoy file. I handed her the document. "This should clarify everything," I said. She took it with a practiced smile, unfolding it slowly as if reading for the first time. Page 1, Summary of Net Worth. Total liquid assets, $480,000. Major holdings, healthcare index funds, partial pension from James's firm, residential property with depreciating value. Page 2, disclaimers, frozen assets, tax details. She read quickly but carefully, the way a person reads when they think something doesn't match what they expected, but aren't ready to say so aloud. Her face didn't change much, but her eyes, those I watched. And I saw it. A single blink missed. Her lashes, always fluttering with charm, froze for just 1 second too long, like a computer buffering. Just one beat. Then it returned. Blink, smile, grateful nod. As if the pause hadn't happened, but it had, and it was all I needed. "This is really helpful," she said softly, folding the paper back and pressing it to her lap. "Thank you for trusting me with this, Margaret. I know that's not easy." I sipped my tea. "You're welcome." A long pause followed. She looked around the room like she was seeing it for the first time, even though she'd been here twice already. Then she glanced down at her hands, gave a soft laugh, and said, "You know, Daniel always says how strong you are, how you've held everything together since James passed. I really admire that." "Flattery wrapped in silk." I nodded. "He's a good boy." She smiled again. "And now he has 2 strong women looking out for him." I didn't answer that. Instead, I reached for the cookie tin and offered her one. She declined, saying she was watching her sugar. I smiled, knowing the macarons she brought had nearly triple the sweetness. After 10 more minutes of polite conversation, she stood to leave, thanked me again, hugged me, briefly, and said she'd keep the file secure, of course. I walked her to the door, and the moment it shut behind her, I didn't move. I just stood there, heart steady, mind alert, because in that single skipped blink, I saw it. She believed it. She believed the lie, the small, meticulously crafted lie. She thought I was ordinary, tidy, manageable, unremarkable. And that was exactly what I wanted her to think. Serena may have come back softer, but I wasn't foolish enough to believe sweetness could hide sharp teeth. She didn't come back for peace. She came back because she needed confirmation. And now, she thought she had it. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't see, was that the real signature had already been written. Not with a pen, but with silence. And it was far more permanent. The call came just after 10 a.m., while I was folding laundry and listening to the rain tap softly against the kitchen window. "Mrs. Margaret Dorsey?" the voice asked. It took me a second. No one had called me that in years, not since James passed. Dorsey was his last name. I'd quietly reverted to my maiden name, Leland, just before I updated our estate files. A private change, tucked between legal pages and quiet grief. "Yes," I answered slowly, my fingers freezing mid-fold. "This is Daniel from First Mountain Credit Union's fraud department," he said. "We're calling regarding a flagged access attempt on a dormant account. It was made under the name Margaret Dorsey." The air in the room shifted. "Go on," I said, steadying my breath. The login attempt was unsuccessful, but it triggered a security notice. It appears someone tried to enter using an outdated password, an older sequence associated with your profile from 6 years ago. The system locked it immediately and alerted us. "Do you know where the attempt was made from?" "Yes, ma'am. It came from a hotel IP address registered to a resort in Sedona, Arizona. The device used was a tablet, model iPad Air 4. The timestamp places it at 2:43 a.m., 2 nights ago." Sedona. Blinked. That was where Daniel and Serena had gone for their honeymoon, a quiet getaway in Red Rock country. He'd mentioned it casually after the wedding, saying something about meditation spas and hiking trails. "I haven't been to Sedona in over 20 years, I said, my voice cool. Daniel from the fraud team hesitated, then replied carefully, "We assumed as much. We've added an extra verification step to all profiles associated with your name. Would you like to reset all old linked accounts just in case?" "No," I said after a moment. "Leave them as is. I need to track if it happens again." He paused again. "Understood. If you suspect identity theft?" "I don't," I cut in gently. "Thank you for the call." We exchanged polite goodbyes, but when I hung up, my hands were ice. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, looking down at a stack of perfectly folded towels that now felt somehow absurd, domestic, fragile. I knew that account. James had opened it in my name the year before his diagnosis, one of many backup accounts meant to shelter parts of our portfolio. The account was empty now, long since moved and consolidated under secure instruments. But it still existed, the bones of it. And someone had tried to animate those bones, using my name, using our name. I walked slowly to James's old study and opened the drawer where I kept the golden key, slipped the chain over my head, let it sit heavy against my chest. Serena had come back with tea and sugar-coated words, all gentleness and understanding. She'd played the role to perfection, just the right amount of hesitancy, the exact measure of warmth. And I'd believed her performance, not because I was convinced, but because I needed her to believe me. And she did. The false file, the deflated portfolio, the modest holdings. She swallowed the bait. But now? Now she'd gone fishing, not through the front door, not with another contract or another plea for transparency. She went where shadows fall. She tried to enter under the name of a dead man's wife. And that, more than any contract or sweet speech, told me everything. This wasn't about helping Daniel avoid probate. This wasn't about transparency. This was about control. The kind you take when you think no one's watching. The kind you grasp when you believe the other woman in the room is just a soft widow with fading memories and folded towels. But I was never just that. I was James's partner, his co-architect, not just in blueprints and investments, but in planning, in foresight, in legacy. And she had no idea the kind of ground she'd just stepped onto. That afternoon, I called Ellis again. I need to move the real files, I said, all of them, to the vault at Crescent Holdings and set up limited read-only access to the dummy file. He didn't ask why. He just replied, "She touched it, didn't she?" I answered only with silence, because now it was no longer a game of observation. Now it was war played in whispers. And the battlefield wasn't just a bank account or a balance sheet. It was trust. It was the fragile space between a mother and her son. It was my name, my late husband's name, used like a password by someone who thought she could inherit not just wealth, but control. I turned back toward the den, closing the curtains. The rain outside had turned heavy now, falling in thick, steady sheets. But the cold wasn't from the weather. It was from the realization that she hadn't just knocked on the door. She had stepped inside. Ellis came by the next morning. He didn't knock. He never did. Just let himself in with that familiar creak of the side door, same as he'd done when James was alive. His coat was damp from the drizzle outside, and he held 2 coffees in a worn leather folder. "Figured you'd need something warm," he said, setting the cup in front of me, "and something sharper." I didn't speak. I just took the folder and opened it. Inside were printouts, IP logs, metadata traces, screenshots, proof. "I had my assistant pull surveillance metadata from the hotel's open networks," he said, gesturing at one page. She was the one using the iPad registered under Daniel's name. But that's not all. Ellis sat down across from me, then leaned back, the kind of posture that warned something was coming. "You ever watch the wedding footage?" I shook my head. I hadn't. Had the stomach for it. The way Serena posed with my son, the polished laughter, the curated tenderness, it all rang hollow even on the day itself. I'd chosen to preserve my peace by not reliving it. "Well," he said, "you should." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a USB drive. "Watch timestamp 4822 to 4840. The mic from the camera caught something it wasn't supposed to." I plugged the drive into my laptop after he left. The screen flickered for a moment, then settled on the reception hall. Candles glowing, people swaying in half-tipsy rhythm, white roses hanging from the ceiling like frozen stars. There they were, Serena and her bridesmaid, leaning close in a corner booth, glasses half full. I clicked play. Her voice was soft but unmistakable, made crisp by the high-end lapel mic clipped nearby. "Just give me a year," Serena whispered, her lips barely moving, "and Daniel will be the one signing everything. Margaret won't stand a chance with the trust he has in me." The bridesmaid laughed, nervous, uncertain. But Serena, she sipped her champagne like she already owned the room. I paused the video, rewound, played again. There was no anger in me, no outburst, just a long, hollow breath that seemed to echo inside my ribcage. It wasn't just manipulation, it was premeditated. Serena had entered our family not with love, but with a timeline, and my son, Daniel, would be the final document. I took a screenshot of the frame, the exact moment Serena uttered those words, her eyes sharp, her smile curved with quiet ambition. Then I printed it, folded the image gently, wrote a short note by hand in the same cursive I used for James's eulogies and holiday cards. If you ever wonder who's sleeping next to you, open this when you're ready. No accusations, no explanations. I slipped both into a beige envelope and sealed it with wax, the kind I hadn't used since James signed our final property together. It felt right. Ritualistic. I found Daniel 2 days later, just before they were due to leave for Serena's parents' anniversary dinner. He looked handsome. He always did. His tie was crooked, like it had been since he was 12. I fixed it without a word. Then I handed him the envelope. "What's this?" he asked, eyes warm with that boyish openness that always unraveled me. "Something for later," I said. "You'll know when." He tilted his head, curious, but didn't press. That was one thing about Daniel. He respected silence. As he walked out the door, I noticed Serena watching us from the car. Her eyes narrowed for just a second, enough to register. She knew something had shifted, but not how much, and that was my advantage, because silence, when wielded carefully, becomes armor. I didn't confront her. I didn't expose her. I let her build her tower on the foundation she thought she understood. But now there was a tremor beneath it, a single envelope, a single truth, and one day it would shake everything she thought she'd secured. I returned to the study and sat beside James's old drafting table. The golden key still hung from my neck. I touched it gently, not for grief, but for clarity. Because when Serena said, "Give me a year," she hadn't counted on the years I'd already spent watching, listening, building. This wasn't just a game of wealth. This was legacy, and I was no longer just the grieving mother she thought would crumble. I was the architect's wife, and I'd just drawn my first line in the blueprint of her undoing. It had been 3 weeks, 21 days of silence from Daniel. Not a call, not a text. I didn't expect him to reach out quickly. When something shatters inside you, especially the trust between a son and his mother, it takes time to gather the pieces without cutting yourself in the process. But that Thursday morning, as the fog still clung to the edge of the porch railings, I heard his footsteps. He didn't knock. The door opened slowly, like a breath held too long, and Daniel stepped inside. His eyes were shadowed. The bags beneath them looked like bruises that hadn't quite healed. His clothes hung looser on his frame, and his once smooth cheeks had a roughness that only regret seemed to grow. In his hand was the envelope, opened. He held it like something sacred and shameful all at once. "I watched it twice," he said. His voice was low, not shaky, just hollow. I said nothing, just turned toward the kitchen. Lavender tea. I always made it when clarity was needed. Not comfort, clarity. The kettle hissed like an exhale, and I let it fill the silence. Daniel followed me into the kitchen, but he didn't sit right away. He stood by the window, looking out toward the small garden I kept behind the house. The rosemary bush was in bloom. "Con ja tin ko ai hon me," he said, switching to Vietnamese the way he sometimes did when emotions made English too sharp. "I wanted to believe love makes people better," he continued. "I wanted to believe I had chosen someone strong, driven, someone who could stand beside me. But she was building something, Mom, and I was just the tool." I placed the teacup in front of him. No words, just the steam rising between us like the breath of something old and aching. He finally sat. "I opened the envelope on the 5th night," he said. "We'd had a fight about money again. She wanted me to push harder. Said I was weak for not getting your signature by now. She didn't know I had already seen it." He ran a hand through his hair. "She kept saying, 'It's for us. It's for our future.' But everything she did, it was all about control. About erasing the space between my name and your bank account." I stirred my own tea slowly. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I looked up, met his eyes. "No." The word was soft, firm like a stone placed gently at the base of a tree. It didn't need, Elaboration. His eyes reddened, but he didn't cry. That was Daniel. He never cried in front of me. Not even when James died. But I saw it anyway. In the way his lip trembled, in the way his shoulders sagged forward like a boy too tired to pretend anymore. "I ended the financial contract yesterday," he said. "Told Serena we wouldn't be moving forward with any joint asset consolidation, that I was stepping away from the account." I sipped my tea. "She left this morning." I looked up. "She said I wasn't the man she married, that I let you manipulate me." "And did I?" I asked, finally breaking the stillness between us. Daniel shook his head slowly, like it took effort to move against old beliefs. "You protected me. I just didn't want to see it." We sat like that for a long while, just the two of us and the tea cooling between breaths. Finally, he placed the opened envelope on the table, smoothing it with his hand. "I'm going to leave the apartment," he said. "Start over. Find work that doesn't involve chasing someone else's ambition. Maybe go back to teaching music part-time." "Where will you stay?" He gave me a weak smile. "Somewhere without echoes." That line cut deeper than he knew. "I'm proud of you," I said. He looked startled. "You're not weak, Daniel. You were hopeful. There's a difference." He looked down, then said something I'd waited years to hear. "I miss Dad." I nodded. "Me too." He stood then, walked around the table, and wrapped his arms around me. Not as a son seeking comfort, but as a man returning home. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just asked to sit in the garden for a while, and I let him. Not because I needed to heal him, but because, for the first time, he wanted to heal himself. The morning after Daniel returned, the house felt different. Not quieter. Quieter had always been its default since James passed, but lighter, like the air wasn't holding its breath anymore. Daniel had stayed the night in his childhood bedroom. I heard the familiar creak of the old floorboard at midnight. His restless pacing had never changed. But by dawn, the house was still, and I knew he had slept. I let him rest. While the kettle boiled again, lavender, always lavender, I opened the small drawer in my desk where I kept things no one else had touched for years. Inside was a simple white envelope. No name on the outside, no instruction, just the weight of memory sealed within. Inside it was a single key, golden, not in color, but in purpose. It was the original key to the 1998 house, our first real investment, the cornerstone of what would become the $35 million portfolio James and I built together. That house wasn't the most valuable in dollars, but in meaning. It had been James's passion project. He restored it board by board after a fire had gutted it decades ago. I still remembered the way he used to talk about it like a person, like a second heartbeat to our marriage. I turned the key in my palm, its weight oddly warm. When Daniel came downstairs, I was already in the garden, pruning the roses. He joined me, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Your hands will smell like lavender forever," he said softly. I smiled. "There are worse things." We sat in silence. The breeze whispered through the rosemary bush. The sun painted soft gold on the trellis. And then I handed him the envelope. He took it without hesitation but didn't open it right away. Just studied it the same way he used to look at piano sheet music, searching for meaning before the first note. "There's a key inside," I said, "to the 1998 property. It's still in my name, but it's part of something larger." He looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly. Not with suspicion, but with reverence. Like he knew this wasn't about real estate. "I've kept that house quiet. It's not listed with the rest. Not even Ellis has full paperwork. It's the back door to the entire portfolio." I saw his fingers tighten slightly around the envelope. "If you unlock that door, Daniel, you'll find not just one house, but the proof of everything your father left behind. Blueprints, contracts, the paper trail to the $35 million. His breath caught. But I wasn't done. "I'm not giving it to you as a reward," I said. "This isn't about inheritance." I paused, letting the weight settle. "It's a test." He blinked, slowly, painfully. "I don't mean that cruelly," I said gently. "But you're standing at a threshold, Daniel, between who you've been and who you can still become." I reached out, placed my hand lightly over his. "If you're the man your father hoped you'd be, the man I caught a glimpse of yesterday, then you'll know what to do with that key." "And if I'm not?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Then let the house sleep. Let the papers gather dust. Let the silence protect what greed tried to corrupt." He didn't speak. He looked at the envelope again, then slowly brought it to his chest and held it there. Tears slipped down his cheek. Not fast, not dramatic, just real. He stood, walked 3 steps toward the porch, then turned back. "I'm not ready to open it," he said. "Not yet." And then he did something I didn't expect. He crossed the space between us and wrapped his arms around me, tight, trembling. "I don't want the money," he whispered into my shoulder. "I just want to be the kind of son Dad would have been proud of, the kind of man who doesn't need a key to prove his worth." I let the silence be my answer, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is the space to become who they were meant to be. And as he held me, the unopened envelope still clutched in one hand, I knew something deeper than property had just changed. He had passed a test I never needed to grade. A year passed, not all at once, not in a flurry of milestones or perfect resolutions, but day by day, quietly, patiently, like the way lavender regrows after being pruned too hard. Daniel moved into a modest bungalow on the east side of town. Nothing flashy, nothing strategic. Just an old fixer-upper with a warped porch and wild ivy curling up the back fence. He didn't ask for help. Didn't even mention it until weeks after the lease was signed. I found out when I dropped off a box of his childhood books and saw paint-streaked overalls hanging from the front gate. He greeted me with a smile and a face smudged with sawdust. "Floorboards are a mess," he chuckled, "but I've never slept better." I didn't press, but I saw it. The shift. The man who once signed documents without reading them now measured every window frame twice. He started his own home repair business 6 months after leaving Serena. Leland Restorations. Painted by hand on a salvaged wood sign outside his tiny garage. He didn't take out loans, didn't chase investors, just offered honest work under fair prices. Word spread quickly. Older neighbors trusted him. Young couples liked that he didn't oversell. He worked with his hands, kept receipts, and came home with sunburnt shoulders and a tired kind of satisfaction that no contract could ever buy. He never mentioned the envelope again, never asked about the 1998 house, the key, or what lay beyond the door he chose not to unlock. And that silence, unlike the one that filled my living room a year ago, felt full of dignity. As for Serena, she disappeared from the radar within weeks of their split. There was no dramatic scene, no lawsuit, no bitter phone call. Just a quiet moving truck, a signed annulment, and her name vanishing from Daniel's vocabulary like a memory he had finally stopped feeding. Some friends said she'd relocated. Others heard whispers of a new fiancé in a different city. I didn't care to confirm. Some exits are better left undisturbed. I found myself watching Daniel from a distance more often than not, through the garden hedges, across the street as he helped a neighbor install a new roof, or from the corner of the hardware store where he debated tile samples like they held the meaning of life. He didn't know I saw these things, but I needed to. Not because I doubted him, but because I had doubted myself for so long. There had been nights, especially right after James passed, when I questioned everything. Had we raised Daniel with enough backbone? Had our silence around money created blind spots? Was our legacy becoming a burden disguised as a gift? But now, I understood what James meant that day years ago when he handed me the golden key. "This only works," he'd said, "if we teach him how to build before we ever teach him how to inherit." I didn't get it then. Now, watching Daniel repaint the shutters on his third client's house, I finally did. He wasn't rushing toward wealth. He wasn't waiting for a signature from me. He was building from scratch, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Because something inside him had shifted, and so had something inside me. One afternoon, while dropping off some lemonade to his work site, I spotted an old tape measure hanging from his belt, the one James had used for over 2 decades. "I thought you hated that thing," I teased. He looked down at it, smiling. "It sticks sometimes, but it always finds center." That night, I sat alone in my study, tea growing cold, and for the first time since James died, I opened the box labeled Final Instructions. Inside were documents, deeds, and a letter written in my husband's steady, square handwriting. It ended with a line I hadn't remembered until that moment. "You'll know when it's time, and if you don't, that's okay too. Some legacies take root in the heart before they ever need a signature." I placed the lid back on gently, fingers resting on the wood. Daniel didn't need to open the envelope, because he'd already opened something far more powerful, his own integrity. And I, in turn, had opened my hand, not to give him a fortune, but to give him room, to become a man worthy of one. It was a Tuesday morning, cool, gray, and quiet. I had just finished watering the lavender by the kitchen window when the doorbell rang. Not the usual double tap of the postman or the firm knock of neighbors, just a single, uncertain chime. When I opened the door, no one stood there. Only a small paper bag sat on my porch, nestled between the doormat and the first step. Tucked neatly inside, I found a glass jar, amber-hued marmalade catching the early light like sunlight caught in syrup. And next to it, a folded piece of notebook paper, torn edges. No envelope. My breath caught for a moment. The handwriting was unmistakable. Serena. I hadn't seen her in 11 months. Since the day Daniel told me she had packed quietly and left, no scenes, no goodbyes. I hadn't asked where she went. I never pressed him. I thought I'd never see her again. But here she was, or at least some part of her, in the form of a homemade jar of marmalade. The very same kind I had taught her to make once, in the earliest days of their engagement, back when I still believed she was simply shy, not sharp, gentle, not calculated. I sat down at the kitchen table and unfolded the note. There were only a few lines. "I know I don't deserve him, and I don't deserve your kindness either, but I wanted you to know. I remember how you stirred the marmalade counterclockwise. I never asked why. I just copied you. Now I understand. You were always doing things the quiet way, even when I didn't see it. You saw through me, and I hated it. But now, I think I needed it. I'm sorry." There was no signature, just that soft apology, tucked between jars and memories. I held the note in my hands for a long time, not shaking, not bitter, just still. There was a part of me, small, faint, that wanted to feel vindicated, to smile with some triumphant sense of, I knew it. But it didn't come. Instead, what came was the memory of her hands in the kitchen, clumsy, eager, wanting to impress but never quite patient enough to learn. I had taught her the recipe because it was one my own mother once made. Stir counterclockwise, never rush the boil, skim the foam with care. Back then, I thought I was building a bridge. Maybe I was, and maybe that bridge had cracked. But sometimes, people return to a broken bridge, not to cross it again, but just to look, to say, I see now where I stumbled. That was what her note felt like. Not a request, not a manipulation, just a recognition. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't even tell him she had come. It wasn't mine to stir up anymore. Instead, I walked to the pantry and placed the jar gently on the top shelf. Not in the fridge, not thrown away, just there. Where I could see it when I needed to remember that even the ones who hurt us can sometimes wake up to the weight of their own reflection. And the note? I didn't burn it. I didn't save it in a drawer. I folded it back the way she had and slid it into the spine of the recipe book she once flipped through absent-mindedly while waiting for the water to boil. The same page where the marmalade recipe lived. There was no neat ending, no redemptive phone call, no promise of change. But there was silence. And in that silence, something that sounded a little like understanding. Maybe not forgiveness. Not yet. But something close. So I went back to watering my lavender. The breeze smelled like citrus and spring, and in the quiet I let myself breathe, deeply, peacefully, knowing that sometimes the loudest confessions are the ones that never ask for a response. The lavender had grown taller this spring, taller than I remembered. Their soft violet heads swayed in the breeze, brushing against my knees as I sat on the old wooden bench James built back in 1989. I sat with the key in my palm, the golden one, smooth from time and turning, the one that had once opened the heavy walnut door to James's private office downtown, his sanctuary, his legacy. Now it didn't open anything. The building had long been sold, but I kept the key like it still held a pulse, not for access, but for memory. It was late afternoon, the kind of gold-drenched quiet that made even birds slow their songs. I watched the sun scatter across the garden, casting slanted shadows between the rosemary and the stones I'd hand-laid myself. It was peaceful, but not hollow. Not anymore. A year ago, I would have said this bench felt too wide for one person. That silence felt like abandonment. But today, it felt like arrival. Not the dramatic kind, with balloons or welcome banners. Number. The kind of arrival that comes quietly, after a long road, when no one else notices but your own bones do. I thought about all the things I'd kept to myself. The weight of them. The inheritance James had left me. Yes, the money, but also the burden of watching over something while pretending it didn't exist. The dignity of silence, even when others assumed silence meant ignorance. The way I watched Serena try to unravel our family from the inside out, while I smiled and poured her tea. I used to think holding back was weakness, that keeping secrets, especially from your own child, was a kind of betrayal. But now I know. Sometimes silence isn't avoidance, it's defense. Sometimes not saying something is the only way to keep it from being torn apart. Daniel had come by that morning, just for coffee. No contracts, no questions. Just his hand around a mug and his eyes tired but calm. He'd started repairing houses now, not flashy homes, small ones. Widow porches, broken pipes, drafty attics. He told me he liked the feeling of fixing what others gave up on, and when he hugged me before leaving, he said, "Thanks for trusting me to figure it out, Mom." I never told him how close I'd come to giving up, not on him, but on the hope that he'd ever see me as more than a stepping stone to something bigger, something shinier, and I never told him what that envelope really meant. But he didn't ask. He never opened the second letter, never used the key. And somehow, that told me more about the man he was becoming than any promise ever could. I closed my fingers around the key again. James would have smiled at that. He always said the key to keeping a family strong wasn't locking things up. It was knowing when not to unlock them. And I suppose now, I finally understand what he meant. There are things I'll never reclaim. Years spent softening my voice, moments lost to the ache of being dismissed, overlooked, talked over. But I'm not that woman anymore. I am not sitting on the sidelines of my own life, not today. I've walked through fire, not with rage, but with grace. I've stood in a room where I was treated as decoration and chose instead to become foundation. And in the quiet of this garden, with nothing but wind and birds and memory around me, I realized something else. Some things never need to be said out loud to save a family. The truth doesn't always have to be spoken to be heard. Sometimes the act of choosing peace over pride, of giving someone the space to fail in return, that's the loudest love of all. I placed the golden key back into my pocket, not because I needed to guard anything, but because I finally knew I didn't need to explain anymore. I had saved what needed to be saved, quietly, steadily, in a way that no one would write books about, but maybe someone would remember when they stir marmalade or patch a broken window or sit with someone in silence. I stood from the bench. The lavender brushed my hand as if to say, "You did it." And for the first time in years, I believed it. If you've made it this far, thank you, truly. Not just for watching, but for walking alongside me through the quiet corners of my life, through the moments I never thought I'd share with anyone. People often assume that silence means surrender, that when we don't shout, don't fight back, don't explain, it must mean we've lost. But I've come to believe that silence, when chosen, not forced, is its own kind of power. I held my tongue when I could have exposed Serena. I kept the truth from Daniel, not out of bitterness, but because I believed, no, I hoped, he'd find it on his own. And he did, eventually. Was it easy? Not for a moment. Do I still wonder if I should have spoken sooner? Some nights? Yes. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes love isn't about giving everything away. Sometimes it's about holding back, just enough for someone to discover who they are without leaning on what you've built. And sometimes the person you end up saving is yourself. So, what do you think? Did I do the right thing? Or did I wait too long to forgive? Was silence my shield? Or just another kind of wall? If you've ever kept quiet to protect someone you love, if you've ever swallowed your words, not because you were weak, but because you were stronger than they knew, I hope you'll share your story, even if it's just a whisper in the comments, because somewhere out there, someone might need to hear it. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to ask, where are you watching from today? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like mine keep you company in the hush between yesterday and tomorrow? Let me know. We read every word with gratitude, with care. And if this story touched your heart, even just a little, please consider subscribing to this channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of something tender, something honest, a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, in second chances, because that's what this really is, isn't it? Not a victory, not revenge, just a woman choosing not to be left behind, a mother choosing to wait, to watch, and to love, quietly. The camera fades now. The lavender still sways outside my window. The steam from my tea curls upward, gentle and slow. And I look out into the evening light with no bitterness in my chest. Just breathe, just memory. And maybe, just maybe, a bit of peace. So wherever you are, whatever pain or hope or question you carry today, I hope you take this story with you, not as a warning, not even as a lesson, but as a soft reminder. Sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care of yourself. And when you're ready, we'll see you in the next story.